Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And this week, we're going to talk all about motivation. I'm so pleased to have Sarah Stones with me, who's a motivation specialist. She's a speaker and coach, and I'll get her to explain more about this. But she is an expert in motivational mapping. And I think this is a really relevant topic at the moment. We've done lots about energy and performance, and how do we make sure that people, particularly in a hybrid environment, are motivated and have maximum energy. And this all ties back to our levels of motivation, doesn't it? So if we could understand more about that, then it's going to help our people feel more energized to live their best. And also it ties into wellbeing. So Sarah, I'm really pleased to have you on the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself and motivational maps a little bit for us?
Yes, I'd love to. So I've got a background. I had 20 years working in HR, and then about 10 years ago now, someone introduced me to a motivational map because I was feeling I would go into a job full of energy, full of, oh, we're going to change this, improve this, and then I'd end up feeling, am I in the right career? And when I saw my motivational report, it was like a whole room full of light bulbs, because it suddenly made sense of why I was feeling the way I was. And that's really led me on a journey over the last 9 years to becoming a real motivation specialist.
And it's interesting, because people will be familiar with things like personality tools. How does a motivation map compare with a personality tool?
So our personality isn't what gets us out of bed in the morning. It's our motivation. And as far as I'm aware, there aren't any other tools out there that measure and identify our intrinsic motivators. And we all focus on our benefits package, which is quite right. We need to have that there. But until now, we haven't really been able to look at what really are someone's intrinsic motivators. And we know from all the work that Dan Pink and all the other researchers have done that actually intrinsic motivation is far more powerful than extrinsic motivation.
Absolutely. There's sort of hygiene factors where people complain about things like reward, but you fix it and they're only motivated for a small amount of time, whereas these things are more intrinsic, so more ongoing motivators. I was just looking here at the origins. So this comes from a bit of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, some of Edgar Schein's career anchors work, and also the personality profiling tool, the Enneagram. So it's pulled things together, hasn't it? So yeah. I'm looking at an image here, and we'll put some links in the show notes for people to be able to see the visuals. So what we're describing here, actually, Sarah, would you like to talk us through these 3 clusters and the 9 types that fit underneath it?
Yeah, so when we're thinking about the hierarchy of needs, the bottom three motivators sit at the bottom of that hierarchy, really, and they are the relationship motivators. And in those relationship motivators, we've got three motivators in there. We've got one which is all around security and stability and routine. We've got one around friendships and relationships at work. And we've got one around recognition. And those motivators, when we look at the group, and we generally will have a spread of motivators across all three of the clusters. But if the relationship ones are the primary ones for someone, they are less likely to enjoy change. They'll need time to think about things before we introduce new ideas. They may be the sort of person that likes to be asked a question and then given time to go away and think about it. And actually, their focus when we're looking at change is how will this affect the people?
Got you. So they're very much, so they, that makes sense. There's relationship orientation. So just so we're going through the 9, and we've talked relationship there, which are sort of the stable ones there. Relationships, there are 3: relationships, achievement, and growth. And the ones you just explained there are someone who would be defender. They call it defender, but they like security and predictability and structure. So that's quite important. The friend, so that's about friendships at work and relationships and belonging. And these are interesting when we think about people working remotely, or those sort of things where it might play into it. And then your recognition one, they've called it the star, but someone who feels that recognition is really key to them, to feel that they're getting that respect and that social esteem. So those are your relationship ones. And what I've just done this report, haven't I, Sarah? So you end up with 3, and I guess they can be 3 against or any of the 9. As it turns out, mine are in one particular cluster, but you'll get 3 particular motivators that the report pins in on. So then do you want to go and talk about achievement motivators, Sarah? So just for the audio, we've got one called the director, the builder, and the expert. Do you want to talk through those?
Yes. Now, the director is all about having control and being in charge. The builder tends to be quite competitive and focus on income, although, and it's interesting how they show up. And then we've got the expert, which is all about learning and development. And these motivators tend to be more focused on the data, on actually how are we going to achieve what we're setting out to achieve. And it's interesting with the high expert motivator, when we see that, it can often, very often, in my experience, linked with perfectionism and the imposter syndrome.
Right, because they don't feel they're expert enough in that situation.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the other ones I was thinking, the director, I think is quite interesting, because you can be a leader and not necessarily have that as a key motivator. So that doesn't, I'm boss in my organization. I've led lots of things. I don't mind leading, but it's not a major motivator for me. And that's interesting, isn't it? Whereas you could have someone in the team, perhaps who is just a member of the team, but that's important to them. So if we're managing them, how can we give them leadership roles, or give them something where they feel that they get that sort of satisfaction, take charge of a project or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. I remember talking to one leader very early on when I was doing this, and I was quite concerned because her director motivator was quite low. I now know that doesn't matter. But actually she said, oh no, she said, I hate doing all the management stuff. She said, I took this role on to make a difference and so that I could make changes.
I mean, that's quite interesting because you could argue that someone with very high director, as in it being about the power, maybe isn't going to be your ideal line manager, because people management is more of a, a growth role. You've got to be supportive, you've got to be patient. There's you have to put yourself almost secondary in many ways to do things. I mean, actually, when we talk about good quality people management, that the motivator of defender, which is actually about security and predictability, so people who are consistent, do regular one-to-ones, that sort of behavior, that would be very important for somebody, and useful skills as a line manager, that sort of preference.
Yeah, I completely. So when I'm going into what motivational coaching feedback session, I'm always quite concerned if I see a high director in a leadership role for that reason.
Yes.
But you always going, I think personality profiles can quite often put people in boxes,
Yeah.
and this isn't about putting people in boxes. A, because our motivators change, but B, because they show up in very different ways. I've had a couple of people with a high builder motivator working in organisations where you think, oh, that's a bit unusual. The high builder motivator has been there because as children they relied on food bank, or they were in a household that there wasn't an awful lot of cash. And so that builder motivator is really crucial for them.
So they want, so they're seeking sort of, as this says, it seeks money, material satisfaction, but it's also linked to security, that about financial security, I suppose, as opposed to the defender being more structural security. That's about financial security. And you're saying that when you've seen them in an organization, which perhaps, so you're not seeing them necessarily in the city where they're earning big bucks, you're seeing them in a more regular organization, but you realize that that's because they need steady and they want to provide security for others and a steady income because they didn't have it themselves. And that is interesting, this key difference. So in terms of a report, you get a rating as to your motivation levels personally at that point in time against all 9 of the motivators. So they are ranked. And as you say, it can change through life or circumstances, which is less likely with personality tools. There. Interestingly, we when I looked at mine, we had the conversation before we came on air that actually I think mine are not that different from how they would have been 20 years ago, in fairness. It's just maybe relative elements to it. And I guess that takes us on to those, because mine all sat in what they call growth motivators. So all mine happen to sit in the same cluster. And those 3 are called the creator. So seeks innovation, likes new things, expressing creative potential. The spirit seeks freedom, independence, making your own decisions. And the searcher seeks meaning, so making a difference and providing worthwhile things. So those are interesting. And we were talking, I did my values when years ago, I was a trainer on 7 habits. So we learned how to do that. And we used to do an exercise, which is elicit your values. And actually I can see that a lot of those values, those aligned with these growth motivators. Some of the others too, but that was something that I can see why it's still relevant. So would you like to tell us a little bit more about this cluster?
Yeah, so this cluster is generally more intuitive, and actually, if we see and I say we, that's my bias coming out. This is my bias area as well. But if you see something and you think, oh, that's a great idea, it's like, right, we want to do it now, we will just go on gutting things rather than planning and thinking about it more. And so we're very change friendly and less risk averse than the other motivators or the other clusters. The creator motivator is all about problem solving and new ideas. And actually, I think that's where, as someone with a disability, we're brilliant at problem solving because we've always had to do it. So that's one of my key motivators.
Does
I
that mean
also,
also you're good at your resilience? Would that mean that would correlate maybe resilience and sort of dealing with adversity?
yeah, I think it would actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also about if the creator is really high, one of the things that we've got to be aware of is bright, shiny rabbit holes, as I call them. It's like, oh, there's a new idea here. It's a new
Absolutely.
idea here.
Guilty.
Yeah, yeah. And then we've got the spirit motivator, which is all about freedom and independence. We do not want to be told what to do, how to do it, when to do it, which interestingly is exactly what someone with a high defender motivator needs. So it's not just about learning about our own motivators. The workshops I run in organisations is teaching people about everybody else's motivators as well. Because if we're in a team and we understand each other better, we can all work together more effectively. And the motivation, I talk about motivation like fuel in a car. Our cars won't go anywhere if we don't put any fuel in them. If we put the wrong fuel in them, I don't know whether you've done that.
Unfortunately, I have. It's very expensive.
Yeah,
Now I've got an electric car, so it's less of a problem. But I have definitely put petrol in a diesel car, and twice, to my shame.
and
Yes,
actually causes a lot of damage,
it
doesn't
does.
it?
Yeah, and
And
it costs
actually
150 quid.
it's the same with our motivators. If someone's giving us the wrong energy and not feeding us with the energy that we need, and we can't do that for ourselves, then actually that's where it really can impact our mental health and well-being.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and then we've got the searcher motivator, which is all about making a difference, having a purpose. And actually, I've worked with, I think, nearly 1,000 people now. And the searcher motivator is by far the most common. Whatever we're doing, when I started out, we always thought the searcher was related to healthcare, to not for profit. But actually, if we see a purpose in what we're doing, then it becomes much easier. It comes back to Simon Sinek's start with why,
that's right.
doesn't it?
And actually, that makes a lot of sense to me because all of the research on things like goal setting, so it's smart goal setting, people are more motivated if they understand why that goal's there. Everyone wants to have a sense of purpose. It's just, it's going to be slightly different based on the organization you work with. Maybe it's easier to see it if you are in a healthcare environment, but whatever we're doing, you want to feel that what you're doing is worthwhile
Yeah.
there. So absolutely, that makes sense. So we've got these achievement motivators. We've all got a proportion of them. You will end up with a top three and a bottom one. You've said they can change through life and through circumstances. Although I guess you probably don't end up your bottom one becoming your top is probably relatively unlikely, I guess.
Yeah.
But
I haven't seen that yet.
you never
But
know.
actually mentioning the bottom one,
Yeah,
the bottom one is also really important
right.
because it can have a real impact on what we do. So For example, if you're in self-employment and you're an entrepreneur and you've got a low star motivator, and that's all about getting recognition, that may well impact on your uh, um, motivation and your energy to go out and do your marketing and network.
So you might feel uncomfortable with the self. So if you're independent, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're an independent person, you've got to self promote, haven't you?
Yeah.
That's interesting actually, because that's not my lowest, but it is a lower one for me, and I always felt very uncomfortable. I hate it when the marketing people put my photo when you kind of pushing yourself forward. Whereas, in order to do a podcast and get people to listen to it, to a certain extent, you have to do that, don't you? So if you're independent, you have to do that self-promotion. So that's an interesting one. You have to be aware that people might find it difficult because it's not a high motivator.
So then what we do is we look at the highest motivator,
Right.
and look to see whether we can use that to lever the lower motivator. So looking at your high searcher motivator, would it be easier for you to go out on that marketing and put yourself forward if you thought, actually, if I do that, I can make an even bigger difference?
Yeah, so you're tying into, so you're doing it for a means to an end in order to achieve that other one, or to create financial stability, or other achievement. Yeah, then that makes sense. So it's tying into that. And of course, really what we're talking about here, I suppose, let's look at it in two ways. So people listening to this podcast can think about their own personal motivation. So we'll do a little refresher and perhaps thinking, so you've heard the different types, and I'm sure some will resonate with people. And obviously, if you want to get your own profile done or do it with others, get in touch with Sarah. But you will have identified with one of either, or two or three, let's say, of the relationship motivators, achievement motivators, or growth motivators. So as a recap, relationship motivator, is the defender. Are you about security, predictability, or stability? The friend, do you want belonging, friendships, fulfilling relationships? That's an interesting one if you're an independent, isn't it? Or the star, about recognition, respect, social esteem. How do you get that recognition? Achievement motivators are the director. Do you need power to be in control of things, like to control resources, have influence? The builder, you want material satisfaction, so you feel financial security, above average living. The experts, do you love knowledge, mastery, specialization? So it's almost knowledge for knowledge's sake. Do you enjoy that? I can imagine that being academics or things like that as well, potentially. And then growth motivators, is it about creation, the creator, innovation, new things that are new shiny things? The spirit, which is someone who seeks freedom, independence, making their own decisions. And the searcher, where you're looking for purpose, which you said is actually a really common one. So lots of us would perhaps identify with that. So if you're an independent person, or in a HR department of one, interesting for you to think about, are any of these motivators that resonate with you, are they being realized? Are they being met? So if you have a high friend one, but you're feeling isolated, that's a great opportunity for networking. In fact, I've got an episode recorded with a lady called Tracy who talks all about connection. So maybe it's, how do you do that, those fulfilling relationships? And you do see there's lots of those groups out there, to make sure we're making the most of those. If you're more of a defender, you want predictability and structure, have you got those structures in place? What can you do to leverage those sort of things? Are there any other ones that would jump out? You're getting someone to think for themselves, where they might realize that something's lacking, and what they can do about it.
Yeah, so the spirit, have you got that freedom? Because it can be that that's a real driver to work for yourself, but actually, are you then putting so much pressure on yourself building your business that actually you don't have that freedom of choice? So it's getting that balance.
It is interesting actually, because so if you're an independent listening to this and you're thinking about setting up on your own, perhaps you'd Sarah should link in with some of these people thinking set up. It's quite a useful tool to do, because if you are going on your own, I would suggest you wouldn't want spirit to be bottom, right? It's too risky for you. You're not going to want to enjoy to it.
Yeah.
Equally, you've got to the builder. If builder is very high up, wanting sort of financial security, you've got to be prepared to take that risk. So have you got a chunk of money you could lean back on? So and those sorts of things. So it'd be interesting, maybe it doesn't suit you to be an independent if you have very low spirit in terms of that. Flip side of it, I mean, actually, that is my highest one, isn't it? And I said to you earlier, that's actually why I left Siemens, because I went from being employed by a manager who just let me do my own thing. Effectively, I was an entrepreneur. I was able to be entrepreneurial. And it was only when I got a manager who was micromanaging me that I realized that I couldn't breathe. And that's why I had to leave. So I realized how important freedom was to me and autonomy when I didn't have it. Whereas when it's being fulfilled, perhaps you don't recognize it so much.
Yeah. And it's really interesting you talked about values earlier. So my builder motivator historically was very low. Now, as having my own business, that really wasn't very useful.
No.
And so through coaching, we've brought that builder up a bit more in importance. So whereas we say there are no right or wrong motivators, it's about looking at the motivators and saying, are they in the right place to where you're at the moment? So for example, the friend motivator, if that comes up very, very high as a coach, I'm then thinking, oh, is there something here around self-esteem and self-confidence? So it enables us to sort of really, from that first coaching session, really have some really in-depth conversations about motivators, which is so easy and non-judgmental to talk about, but actually we get so much richness from that then takes us into that coaching journey.
It's really worth reflecting on what motivates and what doesn't, because ultimately I think this is what makes you, like I say, it's what gets you out of bed in the morning. And you suddenly have a bit of an aha moment if you realize why you're not feeling energetic or flat. And a point you made off camera, which I think is worth highlighting, is that you very rarely would, well, in fact, you've never come across anybody with high levels, above average levels of motivation who's depressed or in a got poor mental health, certainly at work, right? So yeah, it's worth it. And I think that's perhaps, if we go into our sort of maybe final point about this, is where we could use this to help others in organizations. The reality is, you've got, as a line manager, you're going to have people who have a range of motivations. In fact, you showed me a chart off camera, which was nice, which had almost like your team grid of motivations, a bit like a Belbin team roles version of how you see differences in things. And that's quite relevant, isn't it? Because as a line manager, if I really value creativity, but I'm managing somebody who seeks belonging or security, my natural style is going to be a bit erratic. Honestly, it actually is. And so I need to be a bit more balanced and look to satisfy those motivators to get the best out of my team. And if I manage in a sort of erratic way, that's not going to satisfy them, and that's going to make it difficult for them to be motivated and perform.
Completely. And going on from that, when we're looking at recruitment, historically we've just looked at skills and experience, but what we really need from an employer's perspective is we need someone that will be motivated by the job and they fit with the organisation. And from a candidate perspective, because I do career coaching, it's about finding a job that meets your motivators.
Yeah.
And that team grid, we can look at the current team and think about how is this working? Are there any gaps that we need to fill in terms of the motivators? And are there any motivators that will clash that wouldn't be useful? But then we can use the language of the motivators in the job advert, and we can write the job description and the person specification. I now do something called a job profile for my clients.
Yeah.
And we have a section in there that says you will be motivated by. And what I found is that more candidates apply that meet the criteria because they're self-selecting based on the language that we've used.
Yes, I mean, I've come across that in other areas when you're looking at there are overlaps, I suppose, between certain personality styles and things like that. But that makes a lot of sense because when people talk about recruit for attitude and train for skills, I mean, you could say recruit for motivation, right? In this context, couldn't you? And it is, if you're, and I think the layering on of post-COVID work environment. So, if you've now your whole team are working very independently, very separately, someone with very high friend, that might be more difficult than it was when you were all in a close-knit office, and vice versa, right? So those are different too, aren't they?
And the beauty of it is the successful candidate, the managers already got a report there to show them actually insight into this new member of staff. And also, when we know recruitment is so hard, the candidates that have put time, effort and energy into applying but weren't successful leave with a really valuable report that they can then use. You might
use it towards, so you're not going to use it for everybody, but you might use it when you've sifted to get a real fit, but they also get the report. That's good in terms of employer brand, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sarah, thank you so much. I think it's really interesting. I am impressed by the report and the tool. Would you like to explain, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, if they want their own report or wants to know more about what you do, how would they connect with you?
Yeah, so my website is plainsailingmotivation.co.uk. The best place to get a hold of me is on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. And we'll put your connection details in the show notes. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the HR Uprising podcast. It's been a pleasure to meet you and spend time talking to you. And thank you for taking me through my report.
Thank you, Lucinda.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.